Okay, guys, you should have out a clean piece of notebook paper. Please get your notes titled and dated. In this section, we are going to solve equations that include squares and cubes. So in the last two videos, you guys were evaluating square roots and you were evaluating cube roots, okay? So that was the first step. So to understand what squares and cube roots do, we are now going to use them to help us solve equations. So when we have a square problem, we are going to have to solve for a variable that is being squared. So x is being raised to the second power. That's the same thing as saying x squared. And the inverse, okay, so the inverse of squaring something is square rooting something. So previously when we had y plus 7 equals 15, we would use the inverse of adding, which is subtracting, to solve for the variable. So that's what we have to do this time. We have to solve for the variable. We need to know what the variable is. So since x is being squared, we need to use the inverse of square rooting to reverse it. Same thing with the cube root. So if a variable is being cubed, that means it's being raised to the third power. The inverse of that, to get the x by itself, is to cube root both sides. So with adding, the inverse is subtracting. With multiplying, the inverse is dividing. With squaring a variable, this is squaring. With squaring a variable, the inverse is square rooting. With cubing a variable, the inverse is cube roots. Okay, so we're going to go through a few examples. Okay. All right, so we're going to start off with x squared equals 81. Okay, what we are trying to figure out is what number, because x squared means x times x. So what number times itself is going to equal 81? Now some of you might already know that just by knowing all of your multiplication facts. But when we get into the bigger, larger numbers, some of you might not know automatically what that number is. But a lot of you already know that what the value of x is going to be. Okay? So when we square a value, the opposite or the inverse of squaring a number is to square root it. So to get the x by itself, we're going to square root both sides. Okay, that shows us canceling out that exponent so that we have x equals, and then you guys just need to evaluate the square root of 81, which hopefully we all know is 9. Now here's where things get a little bit different, so listen carefully, okay? When they ask us x squared equals 81, they want to know what are all the possible values that x could be, that if I took the base, which is the x, times itself would equal 81. Okay, so we already know that 9 times 9 will give us a positive 81. Because two positives, when you multiply it together, equals a positive. Now here's where things get tricky. Because there's another situation where two numbers that are multiplied together will get you a positive answer. So a positive times a positive equals a positive, but a negative times a negative will also equal a positive. So think about that for a second. 9 times 9 equals positive 81, but so does negative 9 times negative 9, because two negatives also equal a positive answer if they're multiplied together. So because they're asking us what are all the possibilities for x, if x was being squared and it's set equal to 81, we have to tell them that x could equal 9, but it could also equal negative 9. Let's look at another one, and then I'm going to write that down so that we have that in our notes. X squared equals 289. Okay, so we draw our fence the same way we would when we were solving equations last week. Okay, we know that to get x by itself, we have to get rid of that exponent of 2. So the opposite of squaring x is going to be to square root x. That gets x by itself, and then we need to type in square root of 289, and we get x equals 17. But not only does 17 times 17 equal 289, but negative 17 times negative 17 equals 289. So we need to also write down negative 17 as the answer. So guys, part of this is just going to have to be remembering that if it's a squared problem, that there will be two answers. The positive answer and the negative. So when it's an x squared equation, there will always be two answers. Always, always, always. Okay, I'm going to move on. If you need that, go ahead and pause it. All right, let's do one more of those. Guys, notice that so far on all three of these problems, none of my problems have been a squared equals a negative number, because there is no two numbers that when I multiply it together times itself will give me a negative answer. Because if I took 5 times 5, it'd be 25. If I took negative 5 times negative 5, it would equal 25. Those are the only two situations that we could have. So there's never going to be a negative on a squared problem, okay? There's never going to be, a squared equals a negative number. That won't happen, okay? All right, so a squared. So to get the a by itself, we have to square root both sides. Now, guys, what I'm going to require you to do is show me all your work. So if I took the square root of 36 and the square root of 16, I need to see those answers. I know that's going to irritate some of you, but you have to show me all that work. So the square root of 36 is going to be 6, and the square root of 16 is going to be 4. Now, guys, you have to make sure that your fractions are always simplified and no mixed number answers. We talked about that with the first video. So if you take 6 ABC 4, you're going to get a mixed number of 1 1/2. Remember, hit the second ABC button to switch it back. So that equals 3 halves, 3 over 2. So the possibilities for A are 3 over 2 and negative 3 over 2. And you can just write the negative out front. All right. So let's talk about cube problems first, and then we'll practice some more. Okay, so when we have problems that are involving cubes, the variable is going to be raised to the third power. So what we're trying to figure out is what number, if I multiply it times itself 3 times, will equal that value. Okay? So the inverse or opposite of x being cubed is going to be x being cube rooted. Now guys, if you just put the square root like this, it's going to be counted wrong. Because what you're telling me to do is take the square root of x cubed, but that's not what we do. We need to get the cube root. So you have to make sure all your work is correct there. I usually just cancel them out like this so that I can see that you cancel them out. And then what we did to the left side, we have to do to the right side. So we're going to take the cube root of 8. Remember, we hit the 3, the second button, and then we hit that caret button, and then you type in the number. So the cube root of 8 is 2. Now guys, here is where x squared problems are different from x cubed problems, okay? You are only going to have one answer. It will either be positive or negative. So guys, since x cubed equals a positive 8, then I'm going to have a positive answer. Because remember, if I take 2 times 2 times 2, that's the only way for me to get a positive 8. If I was taking a negative 2 times a negative 2 times a negative 2, I would get a negative 8, which is not what that said. So the only possibility here is for x to be a positive 2, since my original problem had a positive 8. Okay, so there's lots of information here so far, guys. So if you need to go back and watch any part of this, because this video is about to be over, and then you're going to have to go to the second video. So if there's any part of this that you didn't catch, or you need to go back and re-listen to, or you want to ask me about, please make sure you're asking questions, because this is a lot of information.